They locked Liora Ward inside an abandoned smokehouse and left the key on her husband's grave. Not a real grave, just a mound of frozen dirt under a wild apple tree, with Caleb's coat spread over the stones because the ground was too hard to open. For 19 days, Liora listened to the winter wind beat its fists against the walls. She had stopped praying by the 10th. She had stopped being hungry by the 14th. By the 19th, she had made peace with the idea that Red Ash Crossing would remember her as a monster. Then the door split open. A man stood in the white glare outside with a hatchet in one hand and snow on his beard. For one terrible second, Liora thought the town had finally sent someone to finish her. But Rafe Carden had not come to kill her. He had come because smokehouses were built to preserve what people were not ready to lose. And before that winter ended, the woman Red Ash called a curse would drag a truth out of the mountain so poisonous it would break the town that condemned her. The smokehouse still smelled of hickory, old grease, and trapped cold. Liora lay curled in the corner where the floorboards had not rotted through, her arms wrapped around a body that no longer felt completely hers. Her fingers were blue at the edges, her lips had cracked until every breath tasted faintly of blood. A clay cup sat beside her, filled with snow she had scraped from a gap in the wall and melted against her chest. It was the only water she had. Food had run out the first week, if 3 shriveled apples and a strip of moldy salt pork could be called food. She had eaten slowly because she knew what hunger did. She had delivered babies through famine years, sat beside men whose bellies caved in after bad harvests, and watched the body begin to bargain with itself. First the pain, then the shaking, then the strange calm that came when the body stopped asking. That calm had arrived 2 days ago. It frightened her more than the hunger ever had. Outside, under the apple tree, Caleb Ward lay beneath stones Liora had stacked with hands so numb she could barely feel them. He had died with one eye swollen shut and both ribs broken on his left side. He had still tried to smile when she pressed snow to his bleeding mouth. "They needed a devil," he had whispered. "I'm sorry they chose you." She had told him not to speak. She had told him he would live. She had lied because love sometimes has no better tool. He died before dawn. Red Ash Crossing had done that to him, not strangers, not raiders, not men with masks, men who had bought bread from him, women who had trusted Liora with their births, fathers who had once carried sick children to her porch in the middle of the night and begged her to do what the town doctor could not. Then the blue fever came. It began in the low quarter, where the river bent behind the Cooper's sheds. The first child was little Amos Pike, 4 years old, bright-eyed and always barefoot even when the frost came early. He vomited until his throat bled. His hands trembled so hard Liora had to hold them still. By sunset, he was seeing things that were not there. By the end of the week, 5 children were sick. By the second, 8. The symptoms made no sense. The fever rose and fell in waves. Their gums darkened, their bellies cramped. Their skin took on a gray, waxen look Liora had only seen in men who worked too long around smelting fires. But these were children. Children who had never been near a furnace. Dr. Merritt called it a nervous contagion. Then he called it bad air. Then he stopped answering questions. Reverend Elias Wren answered them instead. He stood in the meeting house under the Iron Cross and told the town that sickness did not walk alone. It rode on a carrier. It hid behind soft hands. It learned the names of children before it took them. Everyone knew who he meant before he said it. Liora Ward had one pale eye from a childhood fever and a white streak of hair above her left temple. Her grandmother had called it moon-touched. The girls in school had called it pretty until their mothers told them not to. Reverend Wren called it a sign. By nightfall, a crowd stood outside Leora's cabin. Caleb barred the door with a table. Liora still remembered the sound of the first axe blow hitting the wood, not the loudness of it, but the certainty. The way a town becomes one animal when it convinces itself it is righteous. They dragged her out by her hair. Caleb fought them with a fireplace poker. He broke Marcus Bell's nose and opened a cut over Eli Pike's eye before 6 men took him down in the mud. Liora screamed until someone struck her across the mouth. Reverend Wren never touched her. That was how men like him stayed clean. He only raised his voice over the torches and said, "Let the Lord judge what the law cannot." Then they carted Liora and Caleb 6 miles north to the old Hasker orchard, where the smokehouse still stood from better years. They shoved them inside, threw one blanket after them, and bolted the door from outside. "If she is innocent," Wren said, "heaven will open a way." No way opened, only winter. Now Liora stared at the door through the dark and wondered whether Caleb had been right. Maybe towns did need devils. Maybe people could not survive their own fear unless they shaped it into a face. A crack split the night. At first, she thought the roof had given way. Then came another impact. Wood burst inward. Cold air flooded the smokehouse. Liora jerked back, too weak to stand, heart slamming so hard it seemed impossible that such a ruined body could still produce fear. A large man stepped through the broken doorway. Snow clung to his shoulders. A hatchet hung from his right hand. He lowered his head to fit under the frame, and the first thing she saw clearly was the scar that cut from his cheekbone to the corner of his jaw. He froze when he saw her. "Merciful God," he said, "there's a woman in here." Liora tried to speak. What came out was a dry rasp. The man dropped the hatchet. That was the first thing that made her look twice. He did not raise it. He did not step toward her like an executioner. He let it fall to the floor where she could see both his hands. "My name is Rafe Carden," he said. "I'm not here to hurt you." Liora laughed once, a broken sound. That is what men say when they want a door opened. His face changed, not anger, recognition. He knelt several feet away, slow enough not to frighten her. "How long?" 19 days. His jaw tightened. "Alone?" She turned her head toward the apple tree outside. Rafe followed her gaze through the broken doorway. The mound under Caleb's coat was barely visible beneath blown snow. "My husband," Liora whispered. "They left him too." The stranger closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he reached for the pack on his back. "I have water, a little broth. You cannot drink fast. You cannot eat fast. Your body will punish you if you do." Liora stared at him. He knew that, not guessed it. Knew it. "You a doctor?" she asked. "No." He uncorked a tin flask and held it close, not forcing it to her mouth. "I buried one, though." She took one sip. The water hit her tongue like pain. Every instinct screamed to grab the flask and drain it, but Rafe held steady, letting her drink only a little before he pulled it back. "Slow," he said. "Hunger makes the body desperate. Desperate bodies lie." The phrase slipped through her like a memory of a lesson she had once taught other people. He warmed broth in a little iron cup over a fire he built from splintered boards and dry kindling from his coat pocket. He fed her with a carved spoon, one mouthful at a time. Between each, he waited. The patience nearly broke her. Cruelty she understood. Suspicion she understood. But this careful, unearned kindness found a place in her chest she thought had frozen shut. When the broth stayed down, Rafe wrapped a second blanket around her shoulders. It smelled of smoke and horse and cedar. "Who did this?" he asked. Liora watched the fire tremble. "Red Ash Crossing. His eyes went dark. "Wren," he said. She looked up. "You know him?" "I know what he does." The way he said it made the smokehouse feel smaller. Rafe sat back on his heels. 12 years ago, Elias Wren stood in a different meeting house and told a crowd my aunt had soured their wells with charms. Her name was Betha Carden. She knew roots and bones and how to stop bleeding. They hanged her from a sycamore tree. Liora swallowed. "Your aunt. My father's sister. She raised me after my mother died." His voice did not shake. That made it worse. I was 15. I watched from a ditch because she made me run. The wind moved through the broken door between them. Two strangers, joined by the same kind of lie. Rafe looked at Caleb's buried coat, then back at Liora. "Can you walk?" "Not far." "Then I carry you." "No." The word came out sharper than she expected. Pride, maybe. Or the last fragment of the woman who had been dragged through mud and locked away like an animal. Rafe did not argue. He only said, "Then you walk until you cannot." At dawn, he helped her stand. The world outside was too bright. Snow covered the orchard in a clean white sheet, hiding the ruts, the blood, the ugly truth of what had happened there. Liora leaned on the smokehouse frame and looked at the mound beneath the apple tree. Rafe waited. No hurry, no hand on her back, no command. Liora took 3 steps toward Caleb and nearly fell. Rafe caught her by the elbow and let her decide whether to keep leaning. She stopped before the stones. "I have to go," she whispered. The wind answered through bare branches. "I don't know how to leave you here." Her throat closed. For 19 days, dying beside Caleb had seemed like loyalty. Living felt like betrayal. Then she looked at the broken smokehouse door. A way had opened. Not from heaven. From a man with a scar and a hatchet who refused to pass by what others had thrown away. Liora placed Caleb's coat more firmly over the stones. "They don't get both of us." Rafe's voice came low behind her. "No, they don't." She turned from the grave. She made it half a mile before her knees failed. Rafe carried her the rest of the way. His cabin sat above a ravine 3 miles north, hidden in black spruce and rock. It was not large, but it was built like a promise made by someone who expected the world to turn cruel again. Heavy shutters, a root cellar under the floor, firewood stacked high enough to outlast any storm, a rifle above the door. Inside, warmth struck Liora so hard she cried out. Rafe set her in a chair near the hearth and immediately moved the chair back. "Not too close," he said. "Frozen skin burns before it warms." He knew that too. Over the next week, Rafe became a quiet wall between Liora and death. He fed her broth, then softened bread, then eggs. He made her drink water by the hour. He woke when nightmares took her and never asked her to explain what she had cried out. By the 6th day, she could stand without seeing stars. By the 9th, she could walk from the bed to the table. By the 12th, she found his box of dried herbs and reorganized it because half his willow bark had gone stale and he had stored foxglove too close to peppermint. Rafe watched from the doorway, arms folded. "You nearly died 2 weeks ago, and yet your shelves remain an insult." For the first time, he smiled. It did not last long, but it changed his face completely. "You can stay," he said that evening while snow tapped at the shutters. "Until spring. Longer if you need." Liora looked at him across the table. "You do not know whether trouble will follow me." "I know trouble already has." "Then why offer?" Rafe stared into his cup. "Because a locked door is not a judgment. It is only proof that someone had a key and chose cruelty." The words stayed with her. Days became work. Work became strength. Rafe taught her how to read tracks in snow, how to bank a fire so it lived through the night, how to load the rifle without flinching. She hated the weapon at first. Then she remembered Caleb in the mud beneath 6 men and kept practicing. Liora taught Rafe how to clean wounds properly, how to steep feverfew without making it bitter, how to recognize when a patient was improving and when the body was only pretending. They were not friends yet. Not exactly. They were 2 survivors building a language out of useful things. Then the riders came. It was early afternoon, 4 weeks after Rafe broke the smokehouse door. Liora was cutting strips of linen into bandages when Rafe came in from the trees with the rifle already in his hands. "Upstairs," he said. She knew by his voice not to argue. From the loft, she watched through a crack in the floorboards as 3 horses stopped in front of the cabin. Reverend Elias Wren sat on the lead horse, black coat buttoned to his throat, his face calm in the way of men who bring violence and call it duty. Beside him rode Marcus Bell, one eye still yellow from where Caleb had struck him. Rafe opened the door only wide enough to show the rifle. "This land is posted," he said. Wren smiled. "Mr. Carden, I had wondered where you buried yourself. Far enough from men like you. We seek a fugitive woman, Liora Ward. She was sentenced by the community and escaped divine judgment." From the loft, Leora's hand tightened around the floor beam. Rafe said nothing. Marcus leaned forward in the saddle. "We saw 2 sets of tracks by your woodpile." "I have 2 feet," Rafe said. Wren's smile thinned. "Do not turn a matter of faith into a matter of property." Rafe lifted the rifle 1 inch. "You are on my property. That is the matter in front of us." For several seconds, no one moved. Then Wren looked past him toward the dark cabin interior. "If she is here, tell her this. Children are still suffering. God does not forget what she brought into Red Ash." Liora felt the words like a hand around her throat. Still suffering. Rafe saw her move above him but did not look up. When the riders finally left, he barred the door and waited until the hoofbeats faded. Only then did Liora come down. "Children are still sick?" she said. Rafe's face hardened. "That is what he wants you thinking about." "No, that is what I should have been thinking about." She went to the table and spread the town in her mind like a map. Red Ash Crossing, the river, the Low Quarter, the Cooper's sheds, the new dye works on the ridge above the bend, barrels rolling in by wagon, wastewater trenches no one had asked about because the mill owners paid wages when the logging camp closed. Her pulse changed. "Which children?" Rafe asked. "The low wells," she whispered. "Every first case drew water from the low wells." He leaned closer. "Amos Pike, the Bell twins, Ruthie Harlan, the Chen girl, all of them lived below the mill road." "And the children uphill?" "Nothing. Not one." Rafe turned toward the window, toward the southern valley hidden by trees. "What sits above those wells?" Leora's answer came slowly, because the shape of it was too terrible to touch all at once. "Northstar Dye and Tanning." Rafe went still. "They opened the vats in August," she said. "The first sickness came in October. I remember because Mrs. Pike said the river had started smelling like pennies and rotten bark." Rafe crossed the room and pulled down a folded map from a shelf. "Tanneries use arsenic wash, chromium salts if they can get them, lime pits, dyes. If they are dumping uphill, it would drain into the wells." The silence that followed was not empty. It was the sound of the door inside Liora unlocking. "They knew," she said. "Maybe." "No." She looked at him. "Dr. Merritt knew enough to stop answering questions. Wren knew enough to name me before anyone asked about water." Rafe's hand rested on the map. "Knowing and proving are different things." "Then we prove it." He studied her carefully. "Proof means going back. Not to the town, to the works. Armed men guard places that make money. Then we go quietly." He almost smiled again, but there was no humor in it. "You were starving in a smokehouse a month ago, and I have been angry longer than that." 2 nights later, under a moon thin as a blade, they climbed the ridge above Northstar. The dye works sprawled across the slope like a black sore. Low buildings, steam pipes, barrel sheds, trenches cut through snow and mud, carrying dark liquid downhill. Even from the trees, Liora smelled it. Metal, spoiled hides, bitter chemicals that stung the nose. Rafe handed her a field glass. She raised it with steady hands. Workers rolled drums toward the waste trench. A man in a clerk's coat held a lantern while another tipped greenish sludge into a channel. The channel ran downhill toward the frozen reeds where the low wells began. Liora could not breathe for a moment, not because she doubted anymore, because she did not. "They built the trench to carry it there," she said. Rafe's voice was flat. "That is not neglect, that is design." They waited until the lamps thinned and the workers went inside. Then they moved. Liora filled 6 sealed bottles, 1 from above the works, 1 from the vat runoff, 2 from the trench, and 2 from the low spring below. Her hands did not shake, even when footsteps crossed the yard less than 20 paces away. A dog barked. Rafe caught her wrist. Lantern light swept over the barrels. They pressed flat behind a pile of frozen hides, the stink so strong Leora's eyes watered. A guard passed close enough for her to see tobacco juice dark in his beard. Then he saw the broken snow. "Who's there?" Rafe pulled Liora up. "Run." They ran hard through the trees. A shot cracked behind them. Bark exploded from a trunk beside Leora's face. She did not stop. She clutched the sample satchel against her ribs and ran like every dead child in Red Ash had hands on her back pushing her forward. They reached the ravine at dawn, soaked, bleeding from branch cuts, and alive. The bottles had not broken. Rafe built a fire while Liora set them on the table in a careful row. 6 small prisons holding the truth. But truth is dangerous before it is believed. The next day, Reverend Wren sent men to the mountain settlement where Rafe sometimes traded. He accused the settlement of harboring a murderer. He threatened to return with 50 riders and burn every cabin that gave shelter to the pale-eyed plague woman. That was when Rafe stopped talking about hiding. He rode east before sunrise and returned 2 days later with Marshal Jonah Vale, a territorial lawman with frost in his mustache, 2 deputies, and a public health examiner named Henrietta Sloan. Sloan did not waste a word. She uncorked the first bottle, held it to the light, then dipped a testing strip into the green runoff. The paper darkened almost black. "Arsenic compound," she said. Liora closed her eyes. Sloan tested the spring sample next. Lower concentration, but enough to poison a child drinking daily. Marshal Vale looked at her. Could this produce tremors, vomiting, gum discoloration, delirium? Yes, Sloan said, and death. Liora opened her eyes. The room had gone very quiet. Marshal Vale turned to Rafe. "Show me the trench." By noon the next day, Northstar's manager was in irons. By dusk, the marshal's deputies found the ledger. Not hidden well. Men who feel protected rarely hide things well. There were monthly payments from Northstar to Councilman Abel Marr, Reverend Wren's closest ally and brother by marriage. Beside 3 of the payments, the same phrase appeared in Marr's neat handwriting: public unrest contained. In another letter, Marr had written, "The healer woman remains the simplest vessel for blame. Wren can move the town if required." Liora read that sentence 3 times. The healer woman, the simplest vessel. Caleb had died because she had been convenient. Marshal Vale took the paper from her before her hands could tear it. "We ride to Red Ash," he said. The town had gathered before they arrived. Wren had made sure of it. Men with rifles lined the meeting house steps. Mothers stood behind them with shawls pulled tight, their faces hollow from grief. Abel Marr stood near the pump as if the ground beneath him were still solid. Reverend Wren waited at the center in his black coat, Bible in hand, ready to turn another crowd into a weapon. But this time, Liora did not arrive in a cart. She rode beside the marshal, thin, scarred, pale-eyed, alive. A murmur moved through the crowd when they saw her. Marcus Bell spat into the mud. "Should have frozen." Rafe's horse shifted forward, but Liora touched his sleeve. "No," she said, "not first." Marshal Vale dismounted with the ledger in one hand and the sample satchel in the other. "Abel Marr," he called, "step forward." Marr laughed once. "On what charge?" "Conspiracy to conceal industrial poisoning, accepting payments to suppress public inquiry, incitement through false accusation, accessory to unlawful confinement, and the death of Caleb Ward." The crowd changed shape. Not moved, changed. A mob can be strong when everyone faces the same direction, but doubt turns heads. Doubt breaks the animal back into people. Wren lifted his Bible. "This is theater. The woman brought corruption into our homes, and now corruption speaks through lawmen." Henrietta Sloane stepped forward. She was small, gray-haired, and carried no weapon. Somehow that made the crowd quieter. "I tested the water," she said. "The low wells are poisoned by runoff from Northstar's vats. The children who became ill drank from those wells. The children uphill did not." Mrs. Pike pushed through the crowd with both hands clenched at her chest. "My Amos?" she asked. Sloane's face softened, but her voice stayed clear. "Your son was poisoned, not cursed." The words hit the square harder than a gunshot. Mrs. Pike turned slowly toward Wren. "You told me she touched him with devil hands." Wren's mouth opened. No sermon came out. Another mother spoke, then another. Names rose into the cold air like bells. Ruthie, Samuel, Clara, the Bell twins. Every name a child. Every name a wound looking for the right cause. Marshal Vale opened the ledger and read the payments aloud. Amounts, dates, signatures. Abel Marr tried to run when his third signature was spoken. Marcus Bell, the same man who had held Caleb down in the mud, caught him by the collar and threw him to the ground. "You knew," Marcus said, voice breaking. "My boys drank from that well, and you knew." Marr screamed that Wren had promised it would pass. Wren shouted that Marr was lying. The two men began tearing each other apart with the truth, each trying to give the other more of it. Liora watched without satisfaction. She had imagined this moment in the cabin at night. She had imagined vindication would feel hot, triumphant, clean. It did not. It felt like standing beside Caleb's grave again, understanding that truth could name the hand that killed him, but could not pull him out of the frozen ground. Mrs. Pike came toward her. Rafe moved, but Liora shook her head. The woman stopped 3 feet away. Her face had aged 10 years since Amos died. "I cursed you," Mrs. Pike whispered. "I threw a stone at your window. I watched them take you." Liora said nothing. "I need you to hate me," Mrs. Pike said. "It would be easier." Liora looked at the meeting house, at the pump, at the mothers who had been fed a devil because poison was profitable and grief was useful. Then she looked back at Mrs. Pike. "I do hate what you did," Liora said. "I will never make that smaller for your comfort." Mrs. Pike flinched. "But the men who sold you a lie knew exactly how grief behaves when it is handed a target." The woman began to sob. Liora did not embrace her. Forgiveness was not a bandage to be slapped over an open wound. Some wounds had to be cleaned first. Some had to hurt honestly before they could heal. Marshal Vale arrested Abel Marr, Dr. Merritt, and the Northstar manager before sunset. Reverend Wren was taken 2 days later after letters proved he had been warned about the low wells before the second child died. The trials lasted through spring. Northstar was shut down. The owners paid fines large enough to empty 2 warehouses, and still not large enough to buy back a single breath from the children buried in Red Ash Cemetery. Marr died in prison 9 years later. Wren lived longer, which seemed cruel until people stopped crossing the street for him and started looking through him instead. But Liora learned that punishment was not the same as repair. Repair was slower. She returned first to the old smokehouse. Rafe went with her, carrying tools. Together they took down the broken door. Liora kept one rusted hinge, not as a relic of suffering, but as a warning against locked certainty. They buried Caleb properly beneath the apple tree when the ground softened. Then Liora did something no one expected. She reopened her practice, not in Red Ash at first, in the mountain settlement, then in the mill camps, then wherever a wagon could reach and a sick child needed someone who asked more than one question. She made every family mark which well they used. She wrote down symptoms by street, by season, by trade. She taught mothers to boil water, fathers to line wells, midwives to record patterns instead of rumors. Within 5 years, 3 valleys had water inspection rules. Within 10, every new mill had to keep waste uphill from no drinking source and prove it on paper. Within 14, Liora had trained 27 women and 9 men to investigate sickness before naming sin. People began calling her a reformer. She disliked the word. "I am a healer," she would say. "A healer does not stop at the skin. Sometimes the wound is in the water." "Am a healer," she would say. "A healer does not stop at the skin. Sometimes the wound is in the water. Sometimes it is in the law. Sometimes it is in the story a town tells so it can sleep." Rafe stayed, not because she needed rescuing. That season had passed. He stayed because they had become 2 people who could sit in silence without hiding from it. In time, love arrived carefully, without stealing Caleb's place, without pretending the past had been redeemed by a better ending. Nothing redeemed what happened. That was the point. Some losses remain losses. The work is not to make them beautiful. The work is to make them useful without letting them consume everything else. Years later, when Liora was an old woman and Red Ash had clean wells, a stone clinic, and a rule that no public accusation could stand without evidence, a young apprentice asked her why she kept a rusted hinge on the shelf above her desk. Liora touched the iron. For a moment, she was back in the smokehouse, listening to winter try to finish what fear had started. Then she said, "Because a locked door can look like justice from the outside." The apprentice waited. Liora looked through the clinic window at children filling cups from a tested pump. And because somebody has to remember how to open it. They had locked her behind one door. She spent the rest of her life making sure no frightened town could lock the truth behind another.